Welcome everyone. I'm glad to be back on a Roaring Fork Leadership Resiliency Experience here on a Tuesday that we do these every Tuesday, noon to 1. I just wanted to do a call out to CoVenture, who also is in partnership with us providing these programs. These are free. We hope people can join us from the community as we talk about topics related to resiliency. In my opinion, resiliency is very broad. There's a lot of leadership topics that fall within it, and just how we can actually just be more effective in the world and to know when we're not being resilient and giving us skills to be resilient. I think with the current state, a lot of state of the union, right, of the United States, even our countries, internationally, we've been dealing with a lot of things related to COVID over the last, what are we at, 9-10 months, maybe longer, 11 months, just depending on when you feel the beginning of the pandemic started. If it was February or March or even January, or pre that, right? So, but we got a lot of social justice issues that have arisen in our political scene. We've got a lot of diversity, equity, and inclusion conversations and different topics and different approaches to it as well that have shown up. So today we have Brad Stevenson, a Roaring Fork Valley local, and a colleague of his, Tomas Leal. Leal, am I saying that pronounced?
Leal.
Thank you.
Yes.
And they're both been, Brad is an alumni of RFL. He's been on the board of RFL. Another, I would say, one of these leadership masterminds that exist out there that just is enthralled in this conversation, and knowing what his connection with Tomas, I would reiterate the same. But today, the purpose of this program is to explore the impact that COVID and racism, individual has kind of created an effect, right, on our world and groups and teams and our communities and organizations. And I'm really, again, thrilled to have some expertise between Brad and Tomas. And I know Carrie Ann has been really diving into this topic as well. So with the small group we have on, being here live, I'm sure we can have some robust conversation related to this topic. So Brad, thank you. Tomas, thank you for steering the conversation today and helping shine some light on how at the end of the day, we can all be resilient and more aware of these topics, right, in our world today. Thank you.
Thanks. And Andrea, thank you for the invitation to come and do this and work together. So my name's Brad Stevenson, and I love that we actually have a small group. We can get into some really good and really interesting conversation. I feel like the more interactive we are, the more powerful this kind of a session is. I'd love to dive into a little bit of framing around why this matters and what's happening, and kind of bring it to relevance to the moment that we are right now in the world. And then step back, introduce myself, give Tomas a chance to give you some perspective on his very powerful and impressive background. He's a very soft-spoken person with an incredible depth of gentle wisdom, as I hear many say when we work with clients. And really, really honored to be able to have you, Tomas, here to work today. So right now, I mean, we look at 2020, and it's funny here in Aspen's King Company used to have this mantra that was, we have an kind of an embarrassment of riches when we think about all that Aspen has to offer. And we've got things like the Aspen Institute, and we've got the mountains and the outdoors, and we have culture, and we have all of these wonderful things. I would say that this past year, 2020, in a way, has been the depth of challenges. I mean, we look at COVID, we look at inequity and injustice, we look at false news and conspiracy theory. And a few days ago, the closest we've come in, I think I saw the quote from the chairman of the board of Visa, in 245 years, that we've never come so close to the breakdown of democracy. And so we have a lot of challenges, and I think that it's this moment of um, fragility, and it's also this incredible moment of opportunity and truth. We have had laid bare the degree that our society and the fabric of our communities are fragile. They're not as resilient as they need to be. They're a few steps away from falling apart in some cases. And so at the same time, we'll get more into the work that Tomas and I do, but we have never seen a country also more prepared, interested in, hungry for, passionate about change and purpose, and breaking down the barriers and the challenges and the inequities that haven't served us, and building anew, whether that's about the planet, whether it's about diversity, equity, and inclusion and justice, whether it's about our forms of governance and the ways that we run teams and organizations and build communities. There has never been a time that I've been alive, which is getting more and more formidable, that we've seen this openness and this hunger for purpose and for moving towards things that are beyond profit, even in organizations that are historically only profit driven. So with that, I would say that we have an amazing chance in this moment of truth. And that's what we want to talk about today, is the idea of diversity, equity, inclusion through the lens of connection and community resilience. So my name is Brad Stevenson. My background is the Boston Consulting Group is where I started my career. That's a firm that focuses often on larger businesses, a lot of business strategy, business process, usually very kind of large corporate setting, large corporate environment. And I then, through an organization that the Boston Consulting Group hired, Humanetic, was introduced to a whole different way of looking at business and organizations and culture, through the lens of human performance and the things that let you or prohibit you from putting into place wonderful strategies. And it was really captivating for me. And so I've spent, honestly, the last 25 plus years advising businesses and organizations, or running them or starting them, related to purpose and people. And that's led to work in the areas of diversity, equity, and inclusion, a lot of what I would call purpose-driven business development, identifying opportunities where we can put the current of capitalism behind the power of purpose in organizations and help their good works thrive alongside their profitability, so that we can actually amplify and expand good work. And so Tomas and I have been working together for a few years now, and he has brought an incredible perspective, and, as I said before, a gentle wisdom and an immense human and intellectual horsepower behind the work that we do. And I'd love, Tomas, for you to introduce yourself.
Sure. Thank you, Brad. Thanks for that nice introduction, and Andrea as well, and welcome everyone. I always have a little bit of a reaction when we're set up as the and no one said this word, but oftentimes when I'm introduced, expert in diversity, equity, and inclusion, I would say that there's no experts in this field. I would say that we're all sort of trying to find our way through, right? What is going to be, how are we going to be with each other as we continue to grow, to develop, and continue to experience what we've experienced, not only with COVID-19, but with the social justice issues that we are confronting, with racism and all the other isms, right, that kind of intersect with social justice and ecological justice as well. So I have about 24 years experience working in diversity, equity, inclusion, in change work, organizational development. Most of my work was in the private sector, I've worked not only across industries, but globally. I spent about six years in London, in the UK, working with a company that had business in Africa, Middle East, Russia, and the Caspian region, and was really traveling to that region to do diversity and equity and inclusion work. Had the privilege, and I do say the privilege, of being exposed to diversity, not only in the US, of course, but also quite globally. So that's kind of who I am and what I bring to the table. I think if anything, besides feeling privileged, I also feel humbled and a great sense of humility in the fact that so many of my colleagues globally, when I was working in organizations, allowed me in, right? Allowed me into culture, into conversations, into dialogue, and really with my knowledge of organizational change and organizational development and their local knowledge and cultures, right? We were able to make a difference, I think, at least a little bit of difference. So anyway, that's kind of who I am. I'm originally from South Texas. I am a Texan by birth. I'm from a border town, and I grew up bilingual and bicultural. I'm Mexican American. Uh, Latinx nowadays, trying to get used to that term, Latinx. So that's a little bit of who I am. So, I just wanted to kind of add to what Brad was talking about. When the unprecedented happens, then the role of inclusiveness in organizations and across our local communities becomes even more important, right? Inclusion is a way of being, and it's a way of prioritizing our connectivity, right? And this is sometimes overlooked when we're in crisis, right? So in inclusion, I believe it helps me with anxiety, right? And it really also leads to making more fluid decisions with less resistance. So when we talk about resilience, right, it is really important to look at our human connection as a way of being resilient, right? So the typical ways of connecting, right, socially are when those typical ways are diminished or stopped, it's easy to anchor in just our small groups, our affinity groups, our families, our close friends, and that's when more exclusion can happen, right? So it's really important to just sort of to see that there's a great not only a person that does this work, but someone who is an acquaintance. His name says Omri Johnson, and he's a consultant in this space, and he talks about being mindful, being kindful, and being grateful, right, during these times. So finding ways to cope that are mindful, so looking at bigger picture and impact, finding ways of being kindful, as he would say, consider what is most beneficial, not only for myself, but for others, what is most caring for others, and then grateful. I am healthy at this point, and I make sure that others can stay healthy by doing my part, right? Wearing masks, keeping social distance, washing hands, right? Those are the ways that this human I can contribute to this human connectivity, as it were. We can move through calamity with a sense of calm, I believe, and just say thank you, right? Something as simple as thank you to all of those folks that are keeping our community operational. I have the privilege of being able to work from home. I can protect myself from whatever is out there, right? But there are people that work in supermarkets, in grocery stores, in pharmacies, in hospitals. I live in a condominium building in Center City, Philadelphia, high rise. We have 24/7 security. We have desk receptionists, people that do housekeeping, our maintenance crew. These are all people that have to come to work to keep me, us, my community here functioning. So a thank you sometimes is really important. So it's just really thoughtfully responding rather than emotionally reacting to issues, I think. And one of the things that I'm reminded of is the attacks that have happened on Asian and Asian Americans in our country and globally, given that the virus has our origin in Wuhan, China. And then it reminds me of similar reactions on assaults on gay men when I was coming out as a gay man myself, as a result of HIV and AIDS, right? The homophobia that came out during the beginnings of that epidemic. So being shut in, as it were, we're kind of loosening up again in Pennsylvania, in Philly, but we had to go in lockdown again right before Christmas. Does not mean that we need to shut out our communities, and we have technology to thank for that. We're connected here by that technology. So that's kind of my intro to this work that we do, and how I'm thinking about it, and how we approach it. So Brad, would you go to the next slide? Oh, wait, let me, after any questions, comments from Leah, or is it Carrie Ann? Carrie Ann, yes. Comments, or Andrea, anybody?
I've got one. You know, what's interesting is I'm in my master's program right now, and the class I'm just started this week is organizational structure and function. So it's like theory and practice in organizations. And of course, I have my own experience working for a handful of organizations in my lifetime. And, you know, I've always made reference to like the industrial age, right? Where people were, let's say, treated as objects, right? Like just get the job done, you know, and then like fast forward to, you know, Peter Drucker, right? Where like call it this evolution of, you know, how you treat people, right? In the workplace. And it's so interesting that you bring in just like a context to the word inclusion. And another word that my comment is belonging. Right. And I think there's a lot of newer, like that word in the leadership realm of organizations. And I'm sure like the practice of leadership, it's like, how do we create our group, team, community, right? To have a sense of belonging. If there's belonging, I would align that with there's more engagement, there's more empowerment. There's more of that like social responsibility that shows up, right? But if there's a disconnect to belonging, there's breakdown at the end of the day, which can be a piece of why some organizational structures don't work, or lack of communication, right? That transparency that exists, or, and I can see where, you know, the DEI kind of concepts play into all of that, or the culture, right? Like, well, I hate to say white supremacy, right? But like we're built, you know, I did a research paper on this last class, you know, it's like that. Our country was built on a lot of these white supremacy beliefs, right? They still exist. Hence all the social justice stuff that's going on. Anyway, it's just some comments that have really started to align, and then that word belonging, you know, really kind of emphasis.
Yeah, I mean, yes, I think I agree, and I also feel that, or know, I'm working with in higher ed, with a higher ed institution right now, a university, and they started talking about belonging, but then when they did a focus groups with their students and faculty of color, their sense of belonging, the barriers created for a sense of belonging comes from systems, processes, and structures and procedures that are not friendly towards those who are different, who are not white, and who are not male and straight, right? And so it's a bigger word, it's a bigger concept than just feeling like I belong. I need to feel like I belong at my home because my home is set up for me and my husband, right? And this is our family. But when I go into an organization, those systems, how that's structured and set up, may not be conducive to my feeling belonging. So it's interesting that, yes, and you're right, Andrea. I read a lot of like new positions that are being sort of formulated by organizations. Vice president of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, right? So it's interesting that we sort of throw that word out. Yet there's a lot more work that goes with that than just feeling like belonging. So anyway, but I think it's something, I think we're onto something, is my point with this whole concept of belonging. So Brad, next, I'm conscious of the time also. Sure. Brad, next slide.
Actually, since we have such a small group, if you don't mind, Leah and Carrie Ann, I would just love a quick introduction and just to know.
Oh yeah, sorry, yes.
What you do and kind of what brought you here, what interests you about this conversation, and then we can also make sure we tailor it to hit things that are of interest to you.
Hi. Well, I'll go. My name's Leia, like Princess Leia in Star Wars. And I just started a position with Roaring Fork Leadership as their program and marketing coordinator. And I was really interested in joining today because I actually haven't learned that much about diversity, inclusion, and everything else. So I'm just looking forward to getting a basic understanding and start formulating my own thoughts about it all.
Great. And what brought you to this session? Is there any particular piece of information or curiosity that you have that you'd love to see us grapple with?
I can't think of anything now, but I'm already feeling excited about the conversation that's happened so far. Thank you, Tomas, for sharing like your story about coming out and in that movement. And I can relate, I'm Jewish, and so seeing a lot of anti-Semitism happening recently, or really my whole life, and starting to think about that in this context, which I've never done before.
Thanks.
Thanks, Leah. Carrie Ann, you're on mute. There we go.
Nice to meet all of you. I'm Carrie Ann Angrisani, and I am a transformation life coach and a speaker, and sensitive professionals hire me to come into emotional balance because many of them are overwhelmed and overstimulated. And so I help them to connect to their power and turn their sensitivity into their superpower. The reason that I'm here is because this is a lifelong passion or concern, or something that's been on my heart and mind for many years. I did a lot of, I'm from the East Coast. I live here in Carbondale in Colorado, but I did a lot of anti-racism work years ago, and I was part of a improvisational team. We did social change theater, and so that's where I began this interest and necessity to really understand my role and how my privilege affects the people around me and my world. And with 2020, it's just come back to the fore, and I'm really just wanting to learn and grow more in that realm. And very specifically, I'm helping, and I want to talk to Andrea or maybe one of you guys at some point. I'm creating a training. We're going to do a workshop in co-venture for the staff and maybe the members as well. And I want to include this inclusion piece in it because I think it's really essential. So that's another conversation, but just a little bookmark there that we can talk about that another time. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Carrie Ann.
Excellent. So you want to go to the next slide then? Thank you. So kind of providing a framework, and this is also kind of a framework for appreciative inquiry, as it were, right? So a framework for resilience through the lens of human connection. So, discover, dream, design, and deploy. And this is kind of the approach that Aligned Insight takes when we're looking at, starting a process of looking at diversity, equity, inclusion. So really, at first is a phase of discovery, right? Identifying what are the processes in the organization that work well and that help and enhance diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? So really investing in inquiry and data, focus groups, interviews. So that's the first phase, discovery. The next phase would be dreaming, right? And creating that vision, envisioning the process that could work well in the future. So with discovery, you get sort of a current state sense data. And then with a dream, you get a future state, right? What does the future look like? What is true equality and inclusion vis-a-vis the organization or the company that we're looking at. And then we go into a design phase where we're really choosing what processes would work well and build a business case, and then align a core strategy and operation. And to your point, Carrie Ann, that's where perhaps some engagement sessions, dialogue, training, workshops, whatever would come in. And then in terms of deploying, right, we take action. So we implement that culture change. So from what we discover, what we dreamt, what we've designed, right, how do we take action on that? What are the kinds of things that we need to do in order to, create change? We work with organizations, and oftentimes it's kind of become a buzz thing now, right? Everybody wants to do unconscious or implicit bias awareness. Well, yes, and that's important work, but what do you do with that? So the next phase of work around taking action is debiasing our systems, debiasing our organizations. What are those critical questions that we need to ask ourselves as we put that mirror up to ourselves in order to implement and really create culture change? And one of the things, there was a Harvard Business Review article 2 or 3, 4 years ago, maybe, I forget when it was, that talked about the fact that, and typical HBR, they did, they interviewed 365 leaders globally in the corporate sector, this whole study. The basic result was training, engagement, dialogues, town halls, lunch and learns are really great to set a tone. But what really changes culture, what really creates change, is one-on-one contact with difference. Okay, and so that's really, as the quote down here that we have from Brene Brown, connection is why we're here, is what gives purpose and meaning to our lives, right? So it's that personal one-on-one connection that is important. And there are ways that we can almost operationalize or systematize those connections by different peer programs. There was an organization I worked with where we did reverse diverse mentoring for senior leaders. We're being mentored by more junior employees on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so I think there are ways that we can create that change. So just this framework for resilience. And again, we can't emphasize enough how, at least for me, in the last 10 months that we've been in the middle of this, not only this pandemic, but all of the social justice issues that have happened. And I sit in Philadelphia, where there were literal, protests that were met with violence from police force. And then when I looked at what was happening at the Capitol last week, and the reaction from police force there, what a stark difference, right? What a stark difference in terms of how, so definitely racism is at play here when we look at how we're reacting to the different issues that are happening in our culture, our society rather, at this point.
Tomas, I have a question.
Sure.
Or for Brad, either way. Like, I think of, when you go into conversations around DEI or, social justice, whatever ism, right? If it's racism, do you recommend that those groups, like a starting point from my perspective would be is like define it, like define equity for this group, because it might be different. I mean, there's of course standard definitions of what they mean. But I think sometimes what you're talking about, like there's cultures that exist, right? Like, and then if you can find those unconscious bias and, de-bias situations, and then that might uncover, right? That's that, like, discover, and then how do you redesign those things? Is that a recommendation that you do, or a process that you bring in? So it's like creating, like, okay, like I could say I've been suppressed, right? But of course that is probably very different. My definition of it is probably very different than a Black woman, right? For example.
Yeah. I think that's why when we look at this first discover piece, really that's where this comes in terms of gathering data, focus groups, and interviews. What we find, and Brad, please chime in here, what we find is that the different clients we've worked with, the issues, the ways that inclusion or exclusion manifests itself is different depending not only on the company culture, but the culture and the experiences and the realities of the individuals in those cultures. So the power of personal stories, right, cannot be de-emphasized here. And that's where we get in not only our focus groups, but in the interviews, we get, people's perspective and their own reaction. What's interesting is that oftentimes senior leaders are taken aback by other employees' perception of the company, and it's almost like, well, that's not my experience of this. This is a great company to work for. That's not my reality. Well, part of this journey is really being okay with the fact that different realities sit in an organization and different experiences. My being Mexican American, Latino male, gay man from South Texas, Catholic education, all the things that I am, I bring to my life and to my experience, versus Brad, who has a very different upbringing and different experience than mine, right? And so anyway, so Brad, anything to add to that?
Just that it is fascinating. I mean, part of the work we do is to bring awareness to blind spots and to bring, a broader sense of connection to the lived experiences of other people. And that's, in a way, the foundation of where a shift can begin. And it's always interesting, and right, to maybe I can make this generalization as a white male. I'm also Jewish, Leah, but I would say that the amount of oppression I've experienced as a white male that happens to be Jewish, and I can disclose or not disclose that at my leisure, is very different from the experiences of a lot of other folks. And I would say that it's often very surprising. And I think especially for people who haven't experienced or haven't just as their day-to-day reality experienced different forms of swimming against the current, it's always surprising when you hear about other people's stories. When we conduct these sessions, you'll have people who just say, wow, that happened to you? Or people really say that to you? If we're talking about, one of our clients right now is in the ski industry, and they're a major corporation that has ski resorts all over the country and all over the world. And a member of the team is a African-American man, and he also happens to be an elite ski coach. Yet when he gets off the ski lift, people will slow down the chair and try to help him get off and say, hey, the easiest way to get where you're going is, here are the runs you can take. And he just kind of chuckles at one level, but at another level, and I think when his colleagues hear that those things happen, so it's very interesting. That's a super mild example of the kinds of things that you hear in these workshops and sessions, but it is always surprising for folks and interesting and insightful when they understand what a lived experience is for somebody who's very unlike them. So.
Thank you.
Good. Great. Good question, Andrea. Thank you. You want to go to the next slide? I'm conscious of the time. It's 11:35 already or something like that. Anyway, so kind of we talk about being a bystander versus being an upstander, right? And that's kind of a concept that has arisen since George Floyd, and well, not since then, but has come to light. Certainly, it's been around for a while. This whole concept of not just being a bystander, being an upstander, but bystander as ally, but upstander as anti-racist, to focus on race specifically. So a bystander as an ally is you observe, but you don't get involved. It's sort of an inactive, passive act as an ally or as a bystander. You feel support and empathy, certainly, and you can even express that. And spend time educating yourself and gain personal awareness of issues and concerns of the disenfranchised. A lot of intellectualizing of the issue, right? A lot of reading and hearing maybe stories and reading about it and getting yourself sort of educated about this. And then, acknowledging and confronting your own prejudice, biases, and blind spots. So that's kind of in some ways, some of the characteristics of a bystander, right? An ally. I hear a lot of folks say, I'm an ally to the LGBTQ plus community, right? I'm an ally to, the Latinx community. And that's great, right? But I think what we're feeling now, or I'll say for me, what I'm feeling is that I really need some more upstanding, right? Some more anti-racist in the race, basically, area, race space. So it's really, an upstander is choosing to make a difference by speaking out against injustice and racism, right? It's courageous. It creates positive change. It's really about being an activist, right? An activist in a way that uses your own whiteness, as it were, if you're a person who is white, to really raise the issue, right? To really do something actively about race. You offer support and positive interventions to the person being targeted. And it's also an upstander and an anti-racist asks for help, right? And engages others in this process. Brad and I have conversations about, so what is it, as a person of color myself, what do I look to Brad to do to be that upstander, to be an anti-racist, right? And we have great conversations, right? So asking for help from him and engaging with him, right, around this process. Because if you're in the work as we are, then we have to do the work, right? We have to do the work on ourselves as well. You can't just teach like you're teaching computer skills, or you can't just teach like you're teaching, how to make widgets. This is so personal that you have to be in it, right? And you have to do it as you do it, right? As you create opportunities for dialogue. So what does it take to go from ally to anti-racist? It takes authenticity, empathy, knowledge, which can then lead to trust. I think if there was one issue that comes up all the time when communities of color or people of color are talking about how they feel in an organization, they don't feel that sense of trust for their leaders, for their peers, for the organization in general. There's little trust that the organization and their leaders have their back, right? And so, authenticity, empathy, and knowledge, right, all combine to create this trust, or at least start to create this trust. Time and commitment to the journey. Okay, this is new and it's difficult. You have to stay in it again. In order to do it, you have to be it and do it and be in it. Unlearn and re-educate ourselves on the people of color history, right? I'm from Texas. Every Texan in 8th grade is required to learn Texas history. I'll never forget when I went home one day. Now, my parents are both Mexican American, born in the U.S. but of Mexican heritage. My great grandparents were from Mexico, and I remember going home in 8th grade and saying, "Did you guys know that these filthy Mexicans killed Davy Crockett in the Alamo?" And I remember my grandmother looking at my parents going, "Who is this kid?" Right? "What do you mean, these filthy Mexicans?" "That's us, honey." That's us, right? So really unlearning the whitewashed, if I may, the westernized history of the people of color in our country and globally, really. I did some work in South Africa, post-apartheid, the restorative justice work that was being done there by different organizations. And I was working with my company to do this, talk about unlearning a history and unlearning biases and assumptions that white Afrikaners had about, Black South Africans. So again, it's re-educating and unlearning these, being comfortable and uncomfortable rather, and leaning into that discomfort. If I'm feeling uncomfortable about something, another quick anecdote. I have a very dear friend who is a wheelchair user, and Deb and I were talking one day, and I remember early in our relationship as friends, I said to her, it really is, how do you feel when I talk to you? Because I feel like I'm always talking down to you, because I'm a kind of a tall guy, and she sits in this wheelchair. And she said, "Pull up a chair, big guy." I mean, the solution is easy, right? So really, it's our own discomfort sometimes that gets in the way and creates barriers, where the solutions are easy if you just lean into it and you ask about it, right? So really be uncomfortable and lean in. Self-perceptions as non-racist may create barriers to change, right? I am not a racist. Well, that's not a concept. Concept is so neutral that it's almost feels for a person of color that it's not true. Because if you have benefited from these systems set up in this country, to privilege white people, then you have partaken in this culture and in this society. So being purely non-racist and that perception of yourself may create barriers to changing, right? Because you have to be sort of open and honest about privilege, about your white privilege. And again, Brad and I have had so many conversations about this, and other white colleagues and myself. And as I've been told, a white presenting Latino man, right, with my Afro-Latino colleagues and friends as well, right? And the differences that how we show up and how we represent in society, and the types of privileges that I'm afforded by not having much of an accent, and also by being more white looking, more Caucasian looking than some of my brothers and sisters in the Latinx community. Being an ally is not the same as being anti-racist, right? We said that from being bystander, upstander, and it's also staying in the process. As hard as it gets and as difficult as it gets, right? Staying in the process. And I reassure you that people of color, if you're a white person, people of color notice when you stay in the process, right? And you struggle with them, right? To get this and to start getting it right. So I'll stop there and see if there's any reaction, comment. Brad, anything to add from your perspective on this?
Only that, I think in a way, to build on that idea that seeing yourself as non-racist is actually a barrier to identifying your blind spots. And I feel like we're, as humans, in a lot of ways, and this isn't just white to color, or it doesn't go in just one direction.
Right.
We're kind of wired from a survival perspective to be racist. And when I say that, what I mean is to put things into buckets, to identify patterns, to be able to very quickly and without thought make judgments and decisions that had relevance and are genetic or are survival origin, but it's not the same in the way we've constructed our societies. But so they kind of work against us, that ability to think quickly and bucket and judge and categorize. So we all are going to have implicit bias. It's, I think, the nature of being human to have implicit bias. It's a question of how do we recognize, intend, and also act against those biases when they serve to hold others back or down. I don't know, Tomas, if you feel that's a fair kind of a.
No, I think you're absolutely right. And I'm reminded of intent versus impact, right? We might have good intentions by saying I'm not a racist. I don't treat people based on the color of their skin. And from an individual perspective, I believe that, and I have friends that wouldn't treat anyone differently from just a one-on-one situation. However, they are also, again, they partake in a system and they've benefit from a system that puts people down. I mean, when I hear my friend Toby, who's a Harvard MBA, he's 6'3", very dark-skinned African-American man, and he walks through Neiman Marcus, and he gets followed almost every time. I have never been followed at a department store by security, right? Never been followed. So I think those are the disconnects, and back to the point of the power of personal stories and the reality that, and then when you just look at that as a one-off incident, no big deal. You hear white folks say, well, I was followed, but I was wearing my gym clothes and I hadn't, whatever, I had just come out of the gym. And so I looked kind of, well, yeah, but that's a one-off thing. When it happens to you every single time, or most times, that's when you talk about microaggressions. And that's the whole conversation about microaggressions, where those little things that seem meaningless as a one-off continue to accumulate and accumulate and finally result as that breaking point, right? So again, it's really that self-perception, right? That's important to really examine that. Any other comments?
Yes, I'd like to make a comment. First, I have to jump off here in a couple minutes, and I apologize because I would love to stay and talk with you and share stories and ask lots of questions. What's at top of mind for me right now is the distrust that has been showered over us for the past 4 years, and the systemic lying and deceit. How do you approach that through this lens?
Really good question. So the questions, like those that believe that, whatever has been, sort of shared in the last 4 years, how do you work with that? I go back to that one-on-one contact. I go back to that listening. One of my mantras is I don't call people out, I call them in, right? I think that's important, that if you call someone in, if there's someone that's saying, I have a couple of cousins actually, and one is a lawyer, right? Who voted for Trump the first time, voted for Trump the second time, right? And it would be easy for me to just dismiss him, but I love him, and I care for him. We grew up together, and so and it's easier to do that when you have a relationship, right? So we've had great conversations. I kind of get where it's coming from, but sometimes I'm like, really, is that really what you think, right? And for them in South Texas, it's all about immigration. It's all about these people that are coming over and taking over our jobs and our job. And I'm like, that's us, dude. That's where we came from. Maybe a few generations ago, but it's us, right? So again, it's a great question, Carrie Ann, and a difficult one. I mean, Brian, I don't know if you have a perspective, but I would say, again, just going back to the power of personal stories and really calling in someone rather than calling them out. Brad, any perspective?
I really like that. I think that it's about trying not to impugn or judge, but trying to understand. Clearly, this has been a wake-up call for a lot of folks when you look at other people's opinions and you can't put yourself in their shoes. You can't find a way to see what it is that they see. And so there's a real disconnect and need for inquiry and curiosity. The other awareness I've had, which is interesting, is I found it. Have any of you watched a movie it's a documentary called Social Dilemma?
Yes.
I thought that was interesting, and I recently had a conversation with a really good friend of mine, and what I came away with is that our values. He was a Trump voter twice, and I hold a very different opinion. I couldn't imagine voting for Trump the first time, let alone the second time. And what I think we kind of came away with is that our values may not be dramatically similar or different. Sorry, they're not dramatically different. They're just different enough to put us on opposite sides of the slide of social media and news. So he's actually operating with an entirely different fact base and perception of reality than I am. If we both shared the same reality, if we were fed the same information, the same news, and the same perspective on what's true, we probably wouldn't see things that differently. But the fact is, we were different enough to be led very far apart in terms of what we see as real.
Yeah. Yeah. And I have to jump off here, but what I really appreciate everything that you're offering, and hope to continue a conversation at another point. And there's been that thing of "this is not us" that's been going around social media. This is not us. This is not who we are. And it is who we are. There is a big chunk, 75 million of people where curiosity and compassion, and where it's dying, where the desire to have conversation and with different or other is not there. Maybe it never has been. And I have friends that have kind of gone to the dark side, gone over to that side, and trying to have the conversations like Tomas was talking about. I mean, my brother even in my family, it's different. So there's that happening. And there's also, those of us that are in constant conversation and building consciousness or trying to remain conscious and continue develop that inquiry and continue to try to bridge that gap. And so I'm happy to be in the conversation and wanting to expand it. So thank you.
Thank you, Carrie Ann. Appreciate it. Yeah.
Thanks for being with us.
Thanks, Andrea. I'll be in touch with you.
Sounds great.
Bye.
Thank you. Okay. So you want to move on to the next slide? So this is an activity, and of course, we're not going to do it. We don't have time, but this is something that we would actually experience with folks, right? And it's really our experience is different, is important, and it also helps us personalize diversity and inclusion and equity as we define them, right? So this is an activity where we ask people to think of an experience related to a dimension of difference, any difference, yours or someone else's. We've also done it, think of an experience you've had related to race or gender, whatever, dimension we may be focusing in on, yours or someone else's, a time when either you or someone else were excluded based on that specific dimension. All right. So the way we approach this conversation at Aligned Insight is really from a head, heart, and hand perspective. Organizations oftentimes, and this is something that I've experienced directly, we get a lot of knowledge, we get a lot of information, we get the data that we were talking about earlier. And we say, okay, this is the problem we need to solve. It's X. Then we jump to actions, right? We jump to actions. We set up this action plan. We do the typical organizational strategic plan with, goals, objectives, actions, KPIs. It's a very structured kind of process that we use. What's missing oftentimes is that heart, that middle. What is your experience of the problem? Again, back to our original connection to human connectedness. How do we connect to the problem in a way that allows me as a leader, allows me as a member of the organization or as an employee to really connect to the action then and have the action have meaning for me rather than just something we need to do to mitigate risk, to be more compliant, to make sure these people are, doing what they need to do, rather than really getting at the heart of what it is that we're trying to do. So this activity that we do, that sort of, creates that sort of opportunity, I want to say, to feel the emotion behind an issue or an incident, and then look at how did it impact me? What did it lead to any action? Did it lead to any behavior or any change in behavior? So it's kind of a way that we frame again some of this work, the head, heart, and hand. You want to move on to the next slide? I don't know. Well, is there any? Actually, go back. Any questions, comments, Andrea, Leah?
No, it's a great exercise, right? To kind of really do that,
Yeah.
to have the experience, and to share it with someone.
Exactly. So this is a definition, not the definition. It's actually, I think, got cut off in the bottom. It's taken from Garden Schwartz and Rowe, two wonderful women, dear friends of mine, who do a lot of this work as well. So they put together what they call this diversity wheel. The middle circle is really personality, right? It's at the center of the wheel. It represents characteristics like being an introvert, extrovert. The next layer are internal dimensions of diversity. These are for the most part, are those within our control, right? They're strongly, but they also strongly influence our attitudes, our expectations, our assumptions about others, right? So things like age, race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, and physical ability. The third layer is the external dimensions. These are also referred to as secondary dimensions of diversity, and they represent individual differences that have a greater ability influence or control, right? We do control, we can control this. Marital status, our appearance, language, we can learn new languages, different accents. Part of the language piece of this is different accents, those accents that we feel are really cool and exotic, and those accents that, grate upon us, right? The Asians or Latinx accents. I wish these people learn how to speak English. Oh, that French guy sounds really interesting, right? Or that English accent is really cool,
Coming
right?
from Wisconsin, the thicker Midwest twang came from Fargo, North Dakota. That was off. Or Minnesota was even worse than Wisconsin.
Exactly. Just how we language it, right? Worse. Right? It's exactly. So those are the third layer is the external dimensions, right? Work experience, education, background, religion, income. These third, and then the outer layer are organizational dimensions, such as seniority, right? These characteristics are items in the same way under the control, though, of the organization that we work for instance, or the system, government, whatever it is that the organization in. And it's really, we're limited by ability to influence this in some ways. So things like job function, like HR, accounting, the legal area, our location, seniority, our division, school, college, whatever environment we're in. So diversity then is defined as the sum characteristics, experience that makes us all unique, right? The full range of human and organizational differences, similarities. And then inclusion is a process of leveraging the power of these similarities and differences to engage and value people. Andres Tapia from Korn Ferry says diversity is a mix, inclusion is making that mix work, right? And so I think it's really, they go together. Historically, or as a good friend of mine says, hysterically, we have really concentrated on those internal dimensions, right? Race, gender, those are the ones that have really driven this work. But it's really important to really look at a fuller picture of what diversity is. The other thing I like about this is that the way this is represented, and this is not a finite list by any stretch of the imagination, there's so many others, but I think what this does is it really creates an opportunity for all of us in the room, anyone who's looking at this, to see themselves represented in this. And that's the important part of this, right? You need to see yourself in this in order, again, to be in it so that you can do something about it. So next slide. I'm conscious of it's already noon. Sorry. So okay. This is equity, how we define equity. And just real quickly, equality is really, we provide the same sort of level down there for everyone to be at the same height, yet because of our differences, two can, watch the game. This third person who is shorter cannot. Okay, so that difference does not allow that person to see the game. Then we go to equity, where we, as we say, level the playing field, right, in some way. So we stack up the boxes for the little smaller person to be able to see the game, and the person in the middle can still see the game, and of course the taller person can see the game. So that's equity. I think our sort of vision of the future is this liberation piece, which is really to eliminate all the fence completely that represents these barriers. So it's really changing the story, right? And really creating that liberation, that freedom from barriers. And when we talk about de-biasing systems and procedures and processes, that's what we're talking about, right? We're talking about really creating this organization where everybody can thrive and prosper and feel belonging, to Andrea's point, when those structures and those systems are really looked at with a critical eye. I don't know what's next, Brad, but it's 12 noon. Oh, no, I don't want to see that. There you go.
Yeah, I think that's
it, right? That's anything else, Brad, from your?
No. Any final kind of closing questions or?
Leah, did you have a question?
I don't. I just want to thank you guys for taking the time to help educate me and everyone else who will be watching this when it gets up on YouTube.
Thank you.
Yeah, just a huge gratitude. I think this conversation is so interesting, right? Just those different perspectives, approaches. I think your diagram on diversity and inclusion is insightful in itself, right? Just to kind of give that new perspective of what it all encompasses. Just so again, I think, I mean, to say I'm, to say I am a racist, right? Like the idea is, it's true, right? There's all of these biases that exist that I'm not even aware of, these blind spots. And the more we can be educated about these things can help like peel the layers of the onion back so that we can see and we can get to that liberation piece, right? Yes. So there is work to be done. I love that people are having louder, languages about it. People are advocating, being activists in this world, so the change I think is coming at some point, regardless of what political view you are, what religious view you are. I just love that, it sounds kind of like rainbows and roses when we say we can all, kumbaya together, but I love that vision. I really do. And I think if we could do that, just how much more could be accomplished, right? How much more peace there could be, that sense of belonging, that we are all unique and we have a contribution to this world. Yeah. So I really appreciate the perspective you brought, and we'll put, check out the additional information for contacts for any of us on this recording, so that if you want to reach out for more information, you certainly have that capability to do so. So Tomas, a huge thank you, Brad, as well.
Sure. I wanted to say, I'll send you the source, but there is also a great book, How to Be an Anti-Racist. And I want to say the gentleman's name that wrote it is Kendi. I'm forgetting, I'm totally spacing on the author. But anyway, it's a great resource if you really want to dive deeper into the anti-racist piece. Sorry about that. Yeah, so just wanted to sort of say that, and I'll send that over to you, Andrea, as a resource if anyone asks. So
perfect. Well, great. A pleasure to meet you, Tomas, for the first time. I hope there are more connections in our future. Brad, as always, I'm sure we will have more conversations as we tend to connect quite often. And a huge thanks for anybody who is watching this, for those that joined us today live. For this resiliency experience brought to you by Roaring Fork Leadership and Co-Venture. And please join us again Tuesdays noon to 1, Roaring Fork Leadership and Co-Venture's resiliency experience. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Andrea. Thank you, Leah.